Hi everyone. This is a lecture on the Greek alphabet, and in this brief audio and video lecture, I will be going over the letters of the Greek alphabet and the sounds they make. I'll also be going over some important diacritical marks that you're going to be finding within the Greek text as you read materials both in the textbook and in the Greek New Testament itself. Let's begin by going over all the letters of the Greek alphabet. There are 24 letters in the Greek alphabet. 17 of them are consonants and 7 are vowels. So let's look at each line that I have here. We'll begin with alpha, beta, gamma, delta, epsilon, zeta, eta, theta, iota, kappa, lambda, mu, nu, xi, omicron, pi, rho, sigma, tau, upsilon, phi, chi, psi, and omega. Those are the 24 letters of the Greek alphabet. Let's walk through each one of them. We begin with alpha. And alpha makes an ah sound, like you would find in an English word father. So, ah. The Greek word that I have there is the word for angel or messenger, and so it's pronounced angelos, angelos. Next is beta. Beta makes a b sound, like the English word ball, and the Greek word I have there is the word for book or scroll, and it's pronounced biblion, biblion. The next letter is gamma. And gamma makes a G sound, like the English word gift. And the example I have there is the Greek word for writing or scripture, and it's graphe. The next letter is delta, and delta makes a D sound, like our English word dog. And the example I have there is the Greek word for tree, and it's pronounced dendron, dendron. The next letter there is an epsilon. Epsilon makes an E sound, a short E sound, like the English word echo, echo. And the Greek word I have there is the word for I, ego, ego. And I have a picture of myself there because I'm a bit egotistical. The next letter is zeta, and it makes a Z sound, like the word zoo in English. And the Greek word I have there is the word for life, zoe. So if you go to the zoo, you're observing living things. And if you study living things, you're studying zoology, zoe. The next letter is an eta. And eta makes a long E sound, like what we would find in the English word eight, eight. Eta, eight. Now the Greek word I have there is the word for day, and it also has what we call a rough breathing mark above it. You'll see it right above the letter there, and that adds an H sound to that beginning letter. So instead of amera or amera, we would go hemera, 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 day. The next letter is a theta. A theta makes a TH sound like we would find in the word thin. And the Greek word I have there is the word for God. So that would be pronounced theos. Theos. The next letter is an iota or an iota, and the iota makes a short I or a long I sound. So you have two English words there, sit, and ski. So the letter sound will vary accordingly. My counsel to you is listen to how I pronounce the letters, and you'll see. Or you can also look up Greek words online and hear them pronounced. So the example I have there is a short I sound. It's the word for fish, and it's ichthus, ichthus. The next letter is a kappa, and a kappa makes a K sound, like our English word key. And the Greek word I have there is the word for heart, and it's cardia, cardia, where we get cardiac. The next letter is a lambda. A lambda makes an L sound, like the word lock, and the example I have there is the word for word in the Greek New Testament, and it's logos, logos. The next letter is a mu, and a mu makes an M sound like the word for mom. Interestingly enough, the Greek word there is the Greek word for mom or mother. It's mater, mater. The next letter is a nu, and a nu makes an N sound like the word nail. The example I have there is the word for law or instruction, and it's pronounced nomos, nomos. The next word I have there is an xi, and it's pronounced with an XS sound, like fox, fox. And the Greek word I have there is doxa, doxa, which means glory. So when we sing a doxology, we're singing a glory to God. The next letter is an omicron, and it makes a short O sound like ah, often, often. And the example I have there is the word for name, and it's onoma, onoma. The next letter is a pi, and it makes a p sound like the word pond. And the example I have there is the proper name for Paul, Paulos, Paulos. And there's a picture of St. Paul right there. The next letter is a rho. Now the rho makes kind of an RH sound, like rhyme. And so we have a picture of a teacher there, a Jewish teacher, rabbi, rabbi. Jesus was called rabbi in several places in the New Testament. The next letter is a sigma. A sigma makes an S sound like sand, and the example I have there is the word for Sabbath. So, Sabbaton, Sabbaton. The next letter is a tau. A tau makes a T sound, like you would find in the word tap. And the example I have there is the word for child, teknon, teknon. The next letter is an upsilon, and an upsilon makes a kind of a U sound like ooh, boot. And the example I have there is the word for water, which again has a rough breathing mark over it. So it's not ooder, it's hooter, hooter, where we get the modern word hydro. The next letter is a phi, and it makes a PH sound like you get in the word phone. And the example I have there is the word for fear, and it's phobos, phobos, where we get the idea of phobias. The next letter is a chi, and it makes a CH sound, like ache, a hard k sound, ache. And it's the first letter in the name for Jesus, the Messiah, the Christ, Christos, Christos. The next letter is a psi, and it makes a PS sound like you get in the word oops. Okay, psi. And The Greek word I have there is the word for soul or life, and it's psyche, psyche. And finally, the last letter of the alphabet is an omega, and it makes a long O sound, like you'd get in the word obey. And the example I have here is the word for hour, and again, it has a rough breathing mark over it, which adds an H sound to it. So you wouldn't pronounce this aura, you'd go hora, hora, hour. There's three kind of popular pronunciation systems for pronouncing the Greek that we're learning. Erasmian was a system developed by a Renaissance scholar, Erasmus, who assembled probably one of the very first critical editions of the Greek New Testament. He developed a pronunciation system which was highly phonetic, and that's the system that many scholars use. It's a system I was trained in, so that's the one I'll be using in this course. But there is some debate about how to pronounce Koine Greek, so other systems have emerged. Modern Greek pronunciation of Koine Greek reflects the way modern Greek is pronounced today. And reconstructed Greek, reconstructed Koine, is a kind of a reconstructed way of pronouncing Koine based on the study of manuscripts and reconstructing the pronunciation. Again, I'm most familiar with Erasmian. If you recall my slides of the alphabet, you'll notice that you saw two different forms for the letter sigma. There's what's called regular sigma, which is like a circle with a stick. And there's final sigma, which looks very much like our letter S. Regular sigma is used at the beginning and in the middle of Greek words, whereas final sigma is used only at the end of Greek words. Here are some examples of regular sigma. The word soon. Soon is the word for with. Or pistis. Pistis is the word for faith. And you'll see both a regular sigma and a final sigma in that word. And the example I have for final sigma is the word logos, the word for word, and there you're going to see a final sigma. What you discovered as I went through the various letters of the Greek alphabet is that there are some letters that are single letters in Greek, but they make a double consonant sound when we pronounce them in English. For instance, the theta makes a TH sound. The XI makes an XS sound, X. The phi makes a PH sound, a F sound. The chi makes a hard CH sound, a K sound. And the psi makes a PS sound, Ps. So remember, one letter and a double consonant sound. The next slide tells you some differences in how we pronounce the third letter of the alphabet, which is gamma. Now, regularly, the gamma makes a hard G sound, like what you'd have in goat or give. There's the example graphe. But when you see a gamma placed before another gamma, or placed with a kappa, or an xi, or a chi, that initial gamma is pronounced with an N sound, an N sound. It's called nasal gamma. Here's the example that I present to you, and that's the word for angel or messenger. So what you see there is a double gamma, right? So we would pronounce that angelos, angelos. Okay, you see how I've broken down the syllables and transliterated the sound there, angelos. That first gamma is pronounced with an N, angelos. Okay, regular gamma, nasal gamma. As you are learning the letters, Be very careful that you don't confuse similar looking letters. This is in your handout, this is on the slide here. So don't confuse the gamma with the nu, or the zeta with the xi, or the theta with the phi, or the kappa with the chi, or the nu with the upsilon, or the omicron with the sigma, or the phi with the psi. They look similar, but they need to be distinguished. And don't confuse Greek letters with English letters that look similar. They will be different. They'll make different sounds. For instance, don't confuse an eta with our letter N, or a rho with our letter P, or a chi with our letter X, or a nu with our letter V, or an upsilon with the letter U, although they make similar sounds. Finally, don't confuse an omega with our letter W. The Greek alphabet has 7 vowels: epsilon, eta, iota, omicron, upsilon, and omega. There are short letters that are always short, and that's an epsilon or an omicron. And when I mean by short, it means the relative time that you take to pronounce the letter. So a short E is eh, a short O is ah, compared to a long E sound, which is A and eta, or a long O sound, which is omega, ah. There are letters which can be long or short. For instance, the alpha really doesn't make a clear distinction in its long and short. We just pronounce it ah as in father. Whereas the iota can be long or short depending upon where it is in the word, what letters are surrounding it, what letter combos are happening. So it can be, again, a short I or a long kind of I. So, and now the next slide will review some of the sounds with respect to that. And then an upsilon. An upsilon tends to be always having the oo sound, but sometimes it can have a short use, an sound. But most often it's the oo sound. And there's a summary chart of the sounds, the short and the long. And as I mentioned earlier, the I can be or E, a pin or E, marine. Again, be aware of that. I want to talk about the letter iota, and there are letter combinations where an iota will be on the end of a word next to a long vowel. And in cases like that, the iota will subscript. That means the long vowel is so strong and powerful that it's going to force that iota into submission. It pushes that iota under it and it silences it. And that's called the iota subscript. So be aware of that as we learn more about Greek nouns and the definite article in further classes. This is primarily happening within the dative case, and you'll know what that means. So this is the word logos in the dative, and notice that it has a long omega on the end and the iota subscripts. That iota is silent. So that's the iota subscript. I want to talk about diphthongs now. Diphthongs are 2 vowels which come together and make a uniform sound. So when you see in a Greek word the letter combination of alpha iota, it will make an I sound like isle. If you see an epsilon iota, it will make an A sound like 8. If you see an omicron iota, it will make an oi sound like oil. If you see an alpha upsilon, it will make an ow sound like sauerkraut. If you see an omicron upsilon, you'll have a oo sound like soup. If you have an upsilon iota, it'll make a whee sound like sweet. And finally, if you see an epsilon upsilon, it will make an oo sound like feud. Notice that all these letter combinations either have an iota as the second one or an upsilon. Okay, so those are your diphthongs. There are situations where two vowels come together that are not a singular sound. They're not diphthongs, so the letters are pronounced separately. So for instance, eta upsilon is eu, iota epsilon is ie, and iota eta is ea, ea. There are situations also where it needs to be indicated quite clearly that the two letters are pronounced separately. So the Greek word for Cain in the New Testament has what's called a diaresis mark above the iota. So you don't pronounce the alpha iota as a diphthong. You pronounce the two letters separately. So ka, Cain, okay? Or the word for Moses, okay? So what you see above the upsilon is two raised dots, a diaresis, and so you would pronounce that Mo-u-ses. There are two kind of diacritical marks, important diacritical marks in Greek words, and they're called breathing marks. And they are at the beginning of every word that begins with a vowel or a diphthong or the consonant rho. And the two breathing marks are called rough breathing and smooth breathing. The rough breathing, which is like a quotation mark in English with its open part opening to the right, that adds an H sound to the text, to the word, a H sound. And you saw some examples in the previous slides. A smooth breathing does not affect pronunciation in any way. It's like a quotation mark with its opening to the left. Now, people often ask, I get why we add rough breathing. Why do we need the smooth breathing mark? Well, it's really not necessary. I guess the absence of a rough breathing mark would tell you it's smooth breathing, but for some reason it's always there in the text, and it's always there when you write out your Greek words that have smooth breathing marks. It's like dotting the letter I when you are printing or writing. Okay, so let me go through a few examples of breathing marks here. So the first one you have is a smooth breathing mark, and it's the word for apostle. So it's apostolos. Notice no added pronunciation to that. It's just an alpha. But we have the word for a preposition, and it is a rough breathing mark plus an upsilon. And it is huper. This preposition means above or on behalf of. We have an example here of a rough breathing mark with a rho, and it really doesn't add anything significant to the pronunciation. So you don't go, ruomai. Maybe you give a little bit of a trill to the R, ruomai. The next is the word for he, and notice it's a diphthong, so the breathing mark goes over the second vowel in that diphthong, so that's autos. What happens when that autos, is at the beginning of a paragraph or starts direct speech or something? When you capitalize, that alpha is capitalized and the breathing mark still remains above that second letter of the diphthong, so it's autos. What happens if the initial letter has a breathing mark over it, like what we get in the word for Jesus? Well, the breathing mark then is not above the letter, it's in front of. So that's what happens when you capitalize that initial letter of that initial vowel in your word. So this is pronounced Jesus, Jesus. You could also put kind of a y sound to Jesus, Jesus, because this is a unique example. In Hebrew, the y sound is a yod, and when Hebrew words made their way into the New Testament, they're often just transferred over into Greek words. Greek letters and sounds try to approximate the sound that was made by the Hebrew word. So it's still that Jesus. We want to add a kind of a yod sound. Jesus, Jesus, when pronouncing that. Most Greek words that you're going to see in the textbook and in the Greek New Testament have accent marks. There's 3 accent marks. There's the acute. You see the acute there. You see the grove. It's right there. And the circumflex, that little curvy line here. There's lots of rules about accents that if you look in old grammar books, you'll find a whole bunch of rules about placement of the accent. These are not important to you as you're learning Greek. The most important thing that you need to know is that the accent mark is placed over the stressed syllable of the word. So the acute is agape, agape. Or the grave is kephale, kephale. Or the circumflex is agnos, agnos. Next we come to punctuation, and most ancient copies of the Greek New Testament did not have punctuation, or if they did, it is very rare. All modern editions of the Greek New Testament have punctuation marks. And these punctuation marks look similar to our punctuation marks in English, but they're somewhat different in places. For instance, a comma looks like our comma. So a little bit of a stop in a sentence. A period looks like our period. That's a full stop where you have the end of a sentence. A semicolon, which is kind of in between a partial and a full stop here, is this raised dot that's right next to that letter. And finally, a question mark, again, is very different than what we see. A question mark in Greek is like our English semicolon. All these are important to note as you translate, but I'd say the most important one to be aware of is this question mark. Because if you can discern that the Greek sentence that you see is a question, it will impact how you translate that sentence. So I've got some pre-class exercises for you to do prior to the time that we meet this week. So what I want you to do is write out the Greek alphabet and pronounce the name and the letter sound of each letter as you write them. Answer these questions. What are the 7 vowels in the Greek New Testament? What are the 2 breathing marks and when do you find them? When is an iota subscript used and does it affect pronunciation? What is a diphthong? And give an example of one. And when is a diaeresis used? And finally, when is the letter gamma pronounced with an n sound? So that's the opening lecture on the alphabet. I'll see you in class. And until next time, this is your Professor Jim Knight, Jimmy the Greek, signing off.